Radio. I'm Joe Joseph, along with my good buddy Tim Watts. And before we get started, I would like to thank everybody that's come over from the Intel Hub. Intel Hub actually promoted this show for this evening, and it garnered a great response. So thank you, Alex and Shep from the intelhub.com. What a show we have for you tonight, folks. We have RadChick on from FukushimaFacts.com. And also Nuked Radio. I mean, what a great broadcast that she does. And I don't want to prolong things because there's so much to talk about. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's fantastic to have you here. I mean, Fukushima it's such a serious topic, and it has not garnered near the exposure that it needs to get. And where do you start when, let me ask you this, where do you start when you want to inform people about the dangers of Fukushima now being over a year since it actually took place?
Well, the people that I know, I've been talking to them about this since April of last year. And actually, my best friend from high school, she didn't really want to hear about it, and she did a lot of traveling. In fact, she spent quite a bit of time on the West Coast and in the Portland area the first few weeks after the reactors blew up. And I was calling her on her cell saying, you got to be careful when you go outside. Like, I think this is what's going on. And I was so concerned about her, I actually went and to her mother's house, because her mother lives around here by me, and talked to her about it, and her mom got it like right away because she knew so much about nuclear energy. And the other day, my friend called me, and she's actually moving to Morocco. She's been studying the jet stream, and they have some family in the area, and a hotel chain that her husband works for is going to transfer them. And so they're actually bugging out, and she hadn't been paying a whole lot of attention to this until just recently, when she saw some mainstream articles and said, you know what, all this stuff that she's been saying is true. And I could have been on top of this a year ago, and I wasn't.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I mean, what is it that made you hone in on this particular issue? Like, when Fukushima happened, what went through your head, and what made you really feel empowered and want to do something?
Well, I mean, I knew a lot about nuclear energy. I was actually a supporter of nuclear energy, as well as other members of my family. In fact, my dad was in politics in Canada, and when he retired, he actually moved to Canada because he loved how they were using nuclear energy to solve some of their environmental issues. And when my kids were little, we took them to a plant tour of the huge plant that they have on Lake Huron.
Yeah.
And, I've always just incorporated it into my life, but I never knew the truth about the spent fuel and how dangerous a lot of these elements were when they got to the outside, which they are never meant to do. And I have a very close friend of mine, a childhood friend who works in the nuke industry, who actually retired recently from Fermi, and I've been talking to him a lot. But my biggest concern when I realized something was really wrong was when the news shut down all the information that was coming out of there. And it happened about maybe a week into the disaster. And at that point, all the reactors had exploded. There was a plume coming. CNN had a couple people that were in Tokyo. Anderson Cooper was there, and Sanjay Gupta. And they bugged out of there as soon as the reactors exploded, and then all of a sudden you couldn't find any news. And I found one place on Reuters where they had a live blog, and it was the only place where people could really talk to each other about what was going on, and pretty much every physicist was on that live blog. And what really set off the alarms with them was when there was a report that they saw 13 neutron beam events visualized on the grounds around the plant. That means that, like, open air fission was going on, and there were, like, blue rainbows showing up.
Yeah.
That the workers were reporting. And these physicists on this live blog were freaking out. They're like, how can this be happening? And then there was the whole discussion about MOX. And when they heard that MOX fuel was being used in Reactor 3,
yes,
that's when they really got alarmed. And then all of a sudden, I went to that live blog. This was about 2 weeks after March 11th, and that blog was shut down. And Reuters had a statement up there that said there's no new news to report about Fukushima, so we're closing this blog. And I was
you know
like,
what?
what the heck is going on here? This isn't right. Something is seriously wrong with this situation.
You know what that reminds me of, Tim? That reminds me of Christy Whitman saying, the air is safe to breathe. It's okay.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it, folks, you know? Unbelievable.
Same thing, yeah. And that's exactly what they've done here. I mean, folks should take their cue from that, from 9/11. You saw what she did, what Joe just said, Todd Whitman, and they said the air was fit to breathe, and it wasn't. And now, look at the cover we've got going on with Fukushima. How can you believe your government, folks? I mean, it's already been proven they've lied to us. And this is a much bigger deal.
I just recently saw a film, too, of the first responders that were working at the World Trade Center, clearing debris and looking for survivors. And they're all wearing paper masks. And all the EPA people are wearing the full-on NBC respirators, the nuclear, biological, and chemical respirators. But they let all their guys, all these volunteers, work with inadequate ventilation. And that is just so wrong. And there's such a large proportion of those people that now are sick or have died from lung problems.
It is now
it's very sad.
One of the interesting things that I've heard, and one of the interesting arguments that I've heard when I talk about Fukushima is, of course, one of the major ways that the radiation is getting out there is in the ocean, because all that water that was used and continues today to be cooling or to cool the reactors or what's left of them, all that water goes into the ocean. And one of the common arguments I hear is, well, the ocean is vast and dilution plays a major factor. What do you say when somebody brings that up to you?
Well, there's that old saying that Arnie Gunderson's brought up, that dilution is the solution to pollution. And the Pacific Ocean is basically like the world's largest toilet bowl that never gets flushed. Mm-hmm. Radiation doesn't work that way, though, because of bioaccumulation. The particles stick together. And as it gets into the food chain, it actually gets stronger as it works its way up. And because we've never been faced with something like this before, nobody really knows how to deal with it. And there's so many different facets to the problems that are coming out of this plant. The air releases, the corium in the ground. Is it affecting the faults? Are the earthquakes that are continuing there? Some of them which are still aftershocks from the 9.0, are they affecting the buildings that are remaining? Everything is just jerry-rigged. They let their workers go home last week for a vacation, and they've been sending people home on the weekends. And another problem that they're facing, and every day I come across another article that it's like, holy crap, I never thought about this being a problem, but they're running out of nuclear engineers there because their dosimeters won't allow them to work on site anymore. They've been there for a year. They're getting close to the numbers where they're not going to be able to work in that environment. So where do you get nuclear experts from around the world to come work at that plant to run stuff?
How unbelievable is that? And I mean, I heard a good stat today, and I think it was John Stokes, folks. He The Edge with John Stokes every Monday to Friday from 1 to 3 p.m. on Orion Talk Radio. And I heard an interesting fact, and it was that if you go by the pre-Fukushima disaster numbers as far as radiation exposure and what the tolerable limits are, you'd have to evacuate a 20,000 square mile area of Japan. Unbelievable, folks. We'll be right back in 3 minutes, so don't go away. We're just getting started here. You're listening to Freedom Link Radio on the Orion Talk Radio Network. Welcome back, folks. The email address is thefreedomlink@centurylink.net. That's thefreedomlink@centurylink.net. Joe Joseph and Tim Watts here. Our special guest tonight is the RadChick from FukushimaFacts.com. And boy, before the break, we were talking about just first of all, the crisis that's going on in Japan, simply because there's a lack of nuclear engineers there now, that they've reached their tolerable limit. But it's funny, though, when they reach their tolerable limit, I've noticed that the government over in Japan just seems to conveniently raise that tolerable limit time and time again. I mean, that's a problem because it's happening here in the United States too, isn't it?
Yeah, it happened shortly after they brought all the rad monitors back online. They had shut them down here for a while too. And there was a petition that went around to get them reinstated. And I have the actual email from Lisa Jackson saying that she got the go-ahead to raise all the limits for the safe radiation levels, but those numbers are all geared for a 70-pound or larger individual at either a lifetime or once-a-year exposure, and they're not considering that it's coming from multiple sources day in and day out. So in reality, all those levels should be reduced significantly.
Absolutely. I mean, Timmy, think about this. You know, we'll just take mercury for example. You know, you just don't go and raise the tolerable exposure limit of mercury. Or how about asbestos? You know, I mean, at some point in time, somebody's got to raise the flag. And I'm not just talking about us in the alternative media, but more so the mainstream. Eventually, this thing has to get exposure because you're going to start to see the numbers go up, especially in forms of cancer and other health ailments, you know?
Yeah. You know, the thing is, and we've talked about this before, but the way the government reacts when it's a situation that is out of control, that is beyond the scope of their control, they're just not going to admit it. And I'm sorry, folks, that's a sad thing to say, but they're not, because number one, they lose control. And that's the first thing government doesn't want to do. They don't want to lose control. And then, of course, they worry about the litigation, all the people that are going to get sick. No matter what it is, if it's a chemical spill, down through history, our U.S. government has let us down. And I think they're going to, it's certain they're letting us down here. The NRC, just what they've done is criminal by, backing down the radiation readings, or actually upping them, I should say, so that it's tolerable levels. It's, again, what do you expect them to do? They're not going to tell us the truth. They're going to just try to write it out, and they'll deal with it as it unfolds. And, it's sad to say, but that's exactly what they're doing to us right now.
No, absolutely. You will not get the truth from the government because the truth actually is not a popular thing sometimes, and it's a daggum shame because the issue is people need the truth. They need that information in order to make well-informed decisions for themselves and their families. And the one institution, the government, that's supposed to be there to protect everybody is actually doing the exact opposite because they're, and again, the government itself is not an evil thing. It's the people in power that have gone and skewed it and corrupted it. That's the problem, and they're just so hell-bent on protecting themselves, their well-being, and their jobs that they couldn't give a crap about the 300+ million people in the United States and how their actions affect us. And that's the problem. So it makes it even more important that people like you, Christina, are doing exactly what you're doing. So I guess my question is, and don't, you don't have to get into the exact specifics of how you do it, but when you do your radiation report every day, how do you go about formulating that and putting it out? Because I'm amazed at the amount of information that you put out on a daily basis that is different. There's always something new.
Yeah, it took me a while to get a handle on that, and I was kind of waiting for somebody else to start doing it. And nobody did. And, there's people on YouTube like Miss Milky the Clown and Kevin Blanche and Nibiru Magic, who we had on the show today, that started making videos about Fukushima the day that it happened. They knew that much about the subject. And it took me a lot longer to kind of catch up to that level and say, I can't be quiet about this any longer. It's not enough to just be telling my family and my friends and my neighbors. I need to start trying to reach other people. I have to try. And it was when I saw one of the EPA graphs go over 1,000 CPMs in North Carolina one day that was the first video that I made about it. And, it took a while to get some subscribers, and I started sending my videos around to different radio hosts and started going on shows and talking about it. And I have, I worked in the clinical research field for a while, so, I know some stuff as far as that goes. And some of the life experiences that I've had have kind of given me some unique insight to this situation, even when it comes to stuff like sheltering in. But, right now, like, this is taking off. This Fukushima thing is on fire, literally, like, all over the internet because of a lot of the articles that have been published lately.
Right.
And I had one that went viral a couple weeks ago that I'm still seeing other places, like, quoting and rewriting, and it's just being sent all over the place. And even my kids are saying, they know a lot because I was talking to them about it all the time, but they're saying now they're seeing stuff about Fukushima on their friends' Twitters and on their Facebook pages where they didn't see that before. So it is catching on. And, I mean, there's really no time to waste to get the word out because we've already wasted a lot of time.
I agree.
People could have been mitigating if they knew how bad the situation was. But if the government acknowledges it, it's another multifaceted problem because they're going to be expected to do something about it, which is going to require probably a lot of money and experts being sent over there to help mitigate the situation at the plant. We have high levels of contamination all over this country, and physicists have told me that the U.S. is so contaminated right now, the entire country may need to have to undergo decontamination, and it would bankrupt every state and local government. Also, it's going to give a huge boost to the healthcare industry because there's a lot of things that are going to hit you before cancer does, and we don't have we have no way of tracking that except for excess mortality statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Checking people for radiation exposure is not part of a post-mortem exam, even when we have, like, athletes and kids dropping from heart attacks, which some researchers are saying is due to Fukushima.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
Reports from some of the cancer institutes, and Kevin Blanche in particular, who's been involved in one too, because he developed leukemia in the last few months. He said that the cancer center in Utah is full of runners. And runners are outside breathing in the air. They're taking in more air because they're running. So those people are inhaling more particles than the average person just going outside to walk to their car, to go to work every day. People that are exercising outside will see it first. Kids that are playing sports outside. And even some of our athletes, and baseball teams and things like that, they're going to probably be the ones that show symptoms of this first.
Right. What an absolute outrage, to the point you can't even go outside and do your garden or go play with your kids without being poisoned. I mean, unbelievable, folks. Everybody should be absolutely beside themselves with rage over what's happened and what could come. And we'll get into that a little bit more after this break. So don't go away, folks.
Your abilities are awesome and may be called upon by concentrating your thought energy with definite purpose. Just concentrate and the power will be yours. Think clearer. Run fast.
Folks, the power is in us, in each and every one of us, to make a difference. It truly is. And we just have to capture that power and act on it. Make a change. And you can do it within your sphere of influence. And Christina, known as the RadChick, FukushimaFacts.com, and of Nuked Radio here on the Orion Talk Radio Network, is a great example of what one person can do to make a difference, to make change, to affect people's lives. And it's so important.
Talked about this a lot.
All the time.
Yep.
All the time. So it's great, Christina, that you've done what you've done. Now I have a question for you, because during the break, Tim brought up a great question or comment about the rain. You do a lot of outdoor events. You talked about runners, running out all the time, and they're always breathing in. They typically breathe in more air than the normal person, couch potato, does. And the rain. Can somebody just go and take a Geiger counter and be able to know the danger that they're in, or is it more complicated than that?
No, unfortunately, the Geiger counters that we can comfortably afford, which are usually under $1,000, I think mine was like $170, they only give you an idea of whether the radiation is low, medium, or high. The numbers, like the concentration of isotopes and the type of isotopes, has to be measured by much more sophisticated equipment that costs thousands and thousands of dollars. So when we get high Geiger readings, the levels could be 100 times higher than what we're getting.
Unbelievable.
Without that instruments. And we bought all those instruments for the EPA. They have thousands of those machines, and they're not using them. And
no, why would they? Well, that would expose the problem. And why would they want to do that? Why would they want to do that? You know why? Because what that would do to the nuclear power industry in this country is what it would do to the nuclear power industry in Japan right now. Currently, Japan doesn't have any operational nuclear reactors. They've shut them down to see if they can operate without nuclear power. And so far, so good. They haven't had any rolling blackouts yet. Industry has changed the way that they're doing things to where, much of the manufacturing and everything like that happens during off-peak hours. I think they're really making change. But do you think it's like too little, too late?
It's never too late. I mean, considering that we're going to be faced with this the rest of our lives, It's never too late to get started. And there was an interesting article that came out today from Fukushima Diary, and he is a Japan-based blogger who has become very popular. He actually moved, I believe, to France a few months ago to get out of Japan. But he's still blogging, he's still posting articles, and one of the articles he posted today to help out the people in Japan was to let them know that your TV is a big drain on your electricity. So shut it off. And that's something I did right away when Fukushima happened, because I wanted to focus on this exclusively and not get distracted, because I watched CNN and BBC all the time trying to find news on this, and I just wasn't seeing anything. So it's like, I'm going to get rid of it. We won't pay for it for a couple months. But even just not having the TV on in your house, your electricity bill drops. It's like half of what it used to be. And, you're not getting distracted by all this, crazy media stuff that they want you to pay attention to, so you won't know what's really going on.
Right.
And people that are doing their own research, and maybe they're out of work and they can't even afford their cable bill anymore. Fox's numbers are way down, CNN's numbers are way down, and either that's because people are going to alternative sources, they're finding their own news, they're listening to citizen journalists, or they can't afford to pay for the TV bill anymore. And I actually think that's a really good thing, and I highly recommend it to anybody just to try it for a month and not have that distraction and see how much you can learn on your own.
Absolutely. But, in a way, though, it's kind of important to know what they're talking about. And I'm not, believe me, I'm no advocate of television. But at the same time, I use it as a tool to know what they're trying to sell to people. And you're right, the numbers are way down. And you can attribute it to a lot of things, like you said, whether it be that people are waking up. And I truly believe that there's an awakening happening, not only in this country, but in the world in general. I think that the powers that be have gotten very cocky, that now they do things without fear of reprisal or fear of consequence. And as a result, they just do things out in the open that expose them for what they are. And so that has that plays into it. But also the economy. People just can't afford cable anymore, or satellite television, or their electric bill, because the cost of things have just gone so through the roof that it just makes it very difficult to be able to handle it all. So, I mean, I can totally understand where that's coming from. And what's nice is primarily the internet's inexpensive. If you think about it, relative to what it would cost to get cable television in your house every month. And I don't know how much everybody pays for that, but I know that just my cable alone before I had shut it off was about $100 a month. I mean, and that's a significant savings when you shut it off. You know, that's good, especially when everybody's so cash strapped. But the issue is exactly what I said. It's the media. The media doesn't do its due diligence anymore and hold these people accountable for their actions or ask the tough questions. So then it falls on us. And when we do it, you know, we get blown off, we get demonized, but again, it really exposes their character for what it is. So, I mean, I think a good thing to do at this point would be to keep pressing and press harder and get more people to do it and to plug in. I mean, that's so important, isn't it, Timmy?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if people just freaking wake up, you know, and start thinking on their own, instead of trying to follow the government lead all the time. But, you know, not to switch gears here a whole lot, but, you know, there's a quote that's stuck in my head here that I wanted to ask Christina about. It's from an Arriva executive VP, and he said that clearly we're witnessing one of the greatest disasters in modern time. It's just amazing that they can hide this from the press in the mainstream media like this. But Joe and I have talked about the media before and what a failure they've been to us on everything right now. Have you had any sort of luck with contacting the media and trying to get your information out there, Christina?
Well, I tried doing that for a while on some of my local news stations in Detroit, and they all banned me from posting on their Facebook pages.
How the heck do you like that? I mean, unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Here you have somebody that's trying to do good. You know, what do you see in the news all the time? Just crap. You know, whether it be murder, death, kill, or this person robbed this, or this fire burnt down this house. Here you have a good story. You know, here's a concerned citizen that's really going out of her way and sacrificing a lot to inform people as to the dangers. And I'll be honest with you. I mean, when you try to tell people and approach people about this, because it doesn't affect them directly, and when I say that, I mean like they don't feel their skin burning, or they're not having like boils pop up or blisters pop up on their skin, you know, or they're not constantly sick all the time from radiation poisoning, because it doesn't affect them directly. It must not be real, you know. It might
have affected them, and they didn't realize that it affected them because they're not paying attention to this.
Right, but I mean, you might as well wear a tinfoil hat, because I mean that's the way they look at you. But like I said, with this awakening that's going on now, because of the actions of the powers that be, we're seeing now people aren't so quick to discount what you're saying. And I just hope that this really brings about a renaissance in critical thinking, something that we've been sorely lacking in society. But man, I'll tell you what, folks, this broadcast is flying by. So when we come back, we're going to talk about sheltering in. And I'm sure you'll find that very interesting. So don't go away, folks. You're listening to Freedom Link Radio on the Orion Talk Radio Network and AM 1650 Tonawanda.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Freedom Link program with Joe Joseph and Tim Watson. Tonight, our special guest, RadChick. Christina's in the house talking about radiation from her website, FukushimaFacts.com. And also got to mention that she's also right here on Orion. You want to listen to Christina? Check her out Monday through Friday, noon to 1 on the Orion Talk Radio Network. Christina, one good question I want to ask is the stance of the fishing industry. You know, what they're saying right now. And, you know, it should be obvious that they're saying, you know, don't eat the fish, because I know that's the first thing I told my wife when I saw that thing go down. I said, well, that's it for me. I'm not eating fish. Not going to happen, you know, but I would assume that the fishing industry as a whole is trying to downplay this.
Yeah, you can always, just not to interrupt, I just wanted to say, you can always go to the Gulf for some fish, Tim.
Oh, yeah, I can always get that Gulf shrimp. Yeah, thank you, Joe. But
Go ahead, Christina.
Christina, have you heard anything, an official word from the fishing industry itself?
The only official word that I've had was in relation to the Gulf of Mexico shutting down shrimping because they're catching shrimp without eyes. And there's been like dolphins that have been washing up. They have no eye sockets either. There's just like smooth skin. And sometimes that's a sign of radiation exposure too, but they're attributing it to core exit. And just yesterday, Washington State announced that the Department of Health is going to start testing the salmon, steelhead, and clams for radiation levels, and that they'll continue to do so until the public is satisfied. And as long as one state starts doing it, that's all we need. You know, if we have one school that starts checking Geiger readings before they let kids go outside after it rains, or make their kids, you know, playing sports or exercising, wear masks. We only need like one of those to really take off to get other places to do it. And the same thing goes for the forecasts of where the fallout is. We only need like one weather station to start doing it mainstream, and then they'll all do it because they don't want one person to have something they don't.
Well, I guarantee you there have been weathermen that have talked about it, Christina. They're smart enough, they're bright enough, and they know that they should do that, but it just comes from the top. Again, they don't want to do that. It's that corporate line about let's not scare the people. So that's very sad, because you're right. You know, it's something that should be on the weather. That should actually be first and foremost, you know, any day, especially when it's going to rain.
Right.
Well, a lot of the local news stations run ads for the local energy industry. That's part of the problem we have in Michigan is DTE contributes to all the news broadcasts. They buy airtime for commercials, and they're a huge contributor to our current governor in the state of Michigan. I mean, the nuke industry has its hands in everything. That's part of the reason why we're not getting information.
One thing, Timmy, that I want to ask Christina about, and I said before the break, is knowing all this. You talked about sheltering in. What is sheltering in? How does somebody shelter in?
Well, sheltering in was a term that came up in the 60s when we were in the Cold War with Russia, and there was a possibility that they might nuke us. And we even taught kids in schools what to do if there was ever a nuke attack of a major city. And the Civil Defense Department put together huge research projects about how to take care of the dairy cows, how to shelter them, make sure their food doesn't get contaminated by covering the hay with tarps and keeping the animals inside of barns and so forth. And there used to be signs on a lot of like public buildings that had basements that would say fallout shelter. I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember those.
Oh no, they still have some. And as a matter of fact, some buildings in my neck of the woods still have them.
Yeah, and that's still leftover from that time period, and it's not something we even talk about anymore because we have something called the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which, by the way, the United States has never ratified. And we still have, nukes being manufactured all over, and that's all that really nuke plants do is it's an incredibly expensive way to boil water and create steam.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that what Einstein said?
Yeah.
But the byproduct of that is about 500 pounds of plutonium per year per reactor. And the government, because they subsidize these plants, gets to keep all that. They send it to Los Alamos, or they send it to, Livermore, these labs they have around the state, and they make bombs out of them.
Yep.
It's their bomb manufacturing facilities is all that they are.
So you just said 500 pounds of plutonium per
reactor per year. And we have 104. We have 104 in the United States.
Holy smokes! I mean that, folks. I mean that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. I also heard another statistic that the spent fuel pools in the United States are severely overcrowded. I guess you could say. Is that correct?
That's correct because we don't have any permanent facility to put the stuff in the ground and bury it forever.
Oh, that's great. Because that's a good thing to do too.
There was a project, Yucca Mountain, which Obama canceled. And they would put these deep into bedrock where they would remain 100,000 years, you know, and where they wouldn't be a threat to anyone. But then there's been researchers who said they should be stored above ground, but they need to be in containment or concrete or something. Right now they're in these pools. You know, 23 reactors in the States. These pools are 100 feet up in the air at the top of the reactor, just like the ones in Fukushima. And a few years ago, the spent fuel was becoming such a problem that the NRC okayed them to double the amount of spent fuel that they store in these pools. So they're now piggybacking fuel on top of old fuel, and those pools are only meant to be temporary places to hold it for a couple months till it quiets down enough to where they can move it into a permanent facility. But we don't have a permanent facility.
Can we stop for a second there, Christina? Because that's one of the big things that I've had issue with about Fukushima and why people aren't going after GE and Westinghouse, the fools that design these reactors. What kind of a rocket scientist does it take to think about putting your spent reactor out or your cooling pool on the second floor? I mean, so if you're going to have a crack in the building, where's the water going to go? It's going to go out. I mean, you would think that somebody would have thought of, hey, let's do this in the basement, you know, put some sort of seal in there so that the water always stays. But the fact that they put it on the second floor, that just seems criminal. And somebody should be going after GE over this because these were GE reactors, weren't they?
Yeah. Well, they will eventually if we all live long enough. But the original design of that reactor was so that the fuel rods could be loaded into submarines. That's how that reactor design came about, and a number of engineers that worked on that design after they ran the prototype, they were against constructing that reactor, and they quit in protest.
Wow.
I mean, everything
I didn't know that.
Is verifiable. You can, like, anyone listening to this program can look up anything that I've said tonight, and you will find article after article supporting everything that I've said. And that's all that I've been doing is trying to spread that verifiable data around, because this is coming from people who know what they're talking about.
You know, can you believe this? And what's interesting is people that are ignorant to what's really going on, they demonize people like you, me, Tim, and everybody listening to this broadcast. They demonize you as saying, well, you know, you're anti-technology. You don't like technology, you know, and everything. It has nothing to do with technology. It has to do with responsibility. It has to do with doing your due diligence.
Yeah, and any time anybody attacks the person and not the info, it's because they either can't handle it or they're in complete denial of what's going on.
It happens so much. I mean, in the fight against these just pure evil, you know? And one thing that I think about all the time, and it's something that we should talk about probably next hour, is what happens when and if there's a Carrington-level event or something that knocks out the grid. What happens to all of these spent fuel pools when they can no longer get power, when the diesel generators run out of fuel?
Then we have 104 Fukushimas on our own soil. That's what's going to happen.
Exactly. And at that point, it's endgame.
They don't want people to know this. They don't want anyone to know how dire our situation is to begin with, let alone with all these plants all over the place that are, you know, 25, 35, 40 years old. They break down all the time. You can go on the NRC event notification page any day of the week, and there's like 3 or 4 or 5 or sometimes more reactors that have had emergency shutdowns, or they have, you know, workers that fail the drug tests, or, you know, they have problems where the equipment in the plant, really important equipment like the cranes that take the stuff out of the fuel pools, can't stand seismic standards. And we have, you know, earthquakes going on all over the place in places that we've never had them before. You know, they're every day of the week, they have stuff on there that would just, you know, scare the crap out of you if you're paying attention to this. And that's not even the Fukushima problem. That's just the plants here, the age of them, how they're breaking down, and the NRC doesn't do anything until there's a problem. They don't do any preventative maintenance on anything because it's too expensive.
Right. Yeah, they're reactionary.
Building more. All we want to do is build more. Brand new.
General Electric made $14 billion last year, and they pay no taxes.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Well, folks, We've reached the end of hour number 1, but hour number 2, there's so much to talk about. We'll get into a little more about Fukushima and also the threat the nuclear power poses to us in the United States in hour number 2. We're also going to get into this report from Breitbart.com that this latest underwear bomb scare was actually a CIA informant. And of course, my favorite, we're going to talk about Ron Paul and his fight to get the delegate.
That's all government is force. I mean, do you have a choice about paying Medicare taxes? This government uses force to mold behavior or mold the economy. They've overstepped the bounds and they violated the whole concept of our revolution and our Constitution.
Well, it's hour number 2 of the Freedom Link radio program here on the Orion Talk Radio Network. I'm Joe Joseph, and along with Tim Watts, our guest tonight is Christina, the RadChick from FukushimaFacts.com. And, of course, she's got an awesome radio program here on Orion. Nuked Radio, you can listen to it from 12 to 1 here on Orion. Awesome, awesome show. And, before in hour number 1, of course, we went over a whole slew of things that have to do with Fukushima and also our exposure in the United States, not only to Fukushima radiation, but the dangers posed by the 104 reactors that we have here just in the continental U.S. alone. It's amazing the danger, the precipice that we're on. I mean, it comes at us from all fronts, folks. Don't get us wrong here. You know, the nuke part is, of course, one facet of many, but isn't it interesting how we all just seem to be getting attacked from all sides? It's amazing. Now, in hour number 1, we started talking about sheltering in, Christina. Can you expand on that a little bit? What is sheltering in, and how does that benefit people with the radiation just all around us today?
Yeah, sheltering in would be something that we would have to do if there was a collapse of reactor 4 and that spent fuel pool caught on fire or exploded or started a chain reaction where the workers would have to leave the site, and then probably the rest of the place would go up too. And there would be just a massive radiological release. I mean, we've been getting nuked for 13 months. And that's what we've been under a nuclear attack, just somewhat of a low-level attack in comparison to what that would be. But just like what the civil defense recommended to do when this plume of radiation would hit our country, you wouldn't be allowed to really go out, go to school, go to work. You'd have to stay indoors because of the gamma rays and the exposure that you would be getting from outside. And it would be like that for a few weeks, maybe a few months, maybe a few years, depending on how much the material went up and what happened, if it was like a one-time explosion or if there was a fire that burned for months and months on end, then we'd be looking at a much longer situation. We're looking at something that could be anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 years, but most likely it'll probably be somewhere like 2.5 to 3.5 months of not being able to leave your house. And another problem that comes from that is, how are all the nuke workers over here going to go to their job to keep the plants under control here? Who's going to watch the plants if we can't go outside? And are they going to put them all into cold shutdown so we don't have electricity either? I mean, these are just all like, some wild speculations, but this is a real possibility and probably the greatest threat to humanity right now. More important than anything else that's going on, more important than the economy, than the election, than anything, is the status of that reactor number 4 building, because it contains so much nuclear fuel, and it would be just catastrophic if something happened to that pool in terms of the site.
Well, they equated it to
the end of the northern hemisphere, right?
Yeah, that's what I hear. It's like the equivalent of 8,000 Hiroshima bombs worth of cesium. That's what I heard.
Man,
it'd be a lot, and I've had some plans in the works for a while of what my family would do in that situation. And I'm not any kind of survival expert, but I have read pretty much everything the Civil Defense Department put out on that subject back in the 60s, plus some of the stuff from Joel Skuzin and some of these other survival experts. And my family actually kind of went through a really unfortunate situation a few years ago, so I can, like, mentally, I kind of know what that is like. I got injured at work. I had a back injury, and it was actually a spinal cord injury, and it didn't show up for a couple of days. It was like 3 days later that my spine started swelling up, and I went into the hospital. And because it didn't happen right away, workman's comp and disability were fighting about who was going to cover all the costs. And it took them 2 years to figure it out. So my family and I had 4 daughters, had no income for 2 years. You know, you hear this statistic all the time that the average American family is like one medical situation away from total financial devastation, and it's true, and it happens fast. You know, when you think about all the bills that you pay on a week-to-week basis, and all of a sudden you have no money coming in, you know, things start getting shut off quick. And I was on the phone all the time until, you know, I couldn't pay the cell phone bill anymore. And then my furnace broke, and we didn't know if we were going to get kicked out of our house. And I had lived in this house for 17 years and went back and forth with the bank about the situation. And, you know, I'm waiting for disability to come through or workman's comp to come through. And in the meantime, we lost everything. We lost our house. I had to sell my cars on Craigslist so we could buy food. And the only bill that I could pay was the electricity.
Wow.
And sometimes we didn't even have
there's
internet.
An irony. There's kind of an irony right there.
Yeah.
Luckily, I could pick up my neighbor's internet, so I didn't have to pay for internet, so I could still stay online. But all I could afford to pay was electricity and a little bit of food. And, you know, it takes months to get a bridge card, and it takes months to get any kind of assistance. And they always turn you down first and make you reapply. And that's like such a big process. By the time we actually like got some food assistance, it was only a couple months later that the disability finally came through. But by that time, it was too late. Like, we lost everything. We got kicked out of our house.
Oh, man.
And, you know, to go through that and, like, you know, like not having food, and like you start fantasizing about peeling the bark off trees and chewing on it. And I read like about soldiers during the war that were so hungry, you know, they actually like peeled their leather off their shoes and chewed on it.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you really get it, and it happens fast. And
Valley
like,
Forge,
I had known, and we would have had time to have some things to keep us comfortable. Like, I live in Michigan, and we had no heat for 2 winters.
Wow.
Right. And think about this, too. You come from the same state that was giving a lottery winner public assistance. Yet, here you are. You can't get it to save your life. You know?
Right.
Unbelievable irony there.
It was
I
tough.
guess
It was really tough, but the biggest thing that got us through it was helping each other. When one person's weak and having a hard time, everybody else helps boost that person's spirit. And the other thing was always keeping in mind that there are always people that are way worse off than you are. No matter how bad you think your situation is, there's always someone else. They don't have a roof over their head. At least we had a house that we could squat in, and I made that go on as long as I possibly could. You know, because I didn't know how we were ever going to pay rent or anything. And it was just like, finally, when it came through, like, it was just such an unbelievable thing. But to go through that for 2 years gives me a little bit of perspective of what it's like to live without any comforts. And, you know, I know that it is survivable. But the biggest thing is preparing mentally for what you might have to deal with. And we could grow our own food, too, which my kids did both summers. We grew our own food in our garden, and now you can't, you know, really do that safely because of all the fallout that's out there.
Right. No, absolutely. Folks, there's a silver lining in every cloud. And of course, in this aspect, this is valuable life experience that, she will have that will benefit her for the rest of her life. So it's definitely something that, while it's painful in the short run, in the long run, I mean, you just can't get better life experience than that. Welcome back, folks. If you need some of the latest news, there's a couple of websites I want to put out for anybody that doesn't know about them. The first is the intelhub.com. If you need the latest news and headlines of the day, intelhub.com is a great source for that. And also federaljack.com. It's run by one of our hosts here under Ryan Talk Radio, Popeye. His show Down the Rabbit Hole can be heard every Wednesday and Friday from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and again on Sunday from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. And fantastic websites. I suggest you guys go visit them. Add them to your favorites on your browser. We're here with Christina, the RadChick. And, boy, Timmy, I've kind of hogged the question and stuff. So why don't you go ahead and have at it?
Oh, there's plenty of questions to go around. I've heard Christina plenty of times now. Popeye's talked with her, and I've heard her on her own show. And Christina, you're just a treasure trove of information. But one thing that I picked up from you that I think is worth repeating again is all the things that people can do to help protect themselves right now, nutritionally. Getting away from dairy, things like that, and the vitamin supplements you talk about. Why don't you touch on some of the things that are really good that people should probably have in their household right now?
Sure, and that's part of the thing that drives me so crazy, too, is it's all really easy, like common sense stuff that if people knew, like how much radiation could affect their health and their children's health. They could have easily been doing a lot of these things. But, like, the number one thing that I tell people is to treat yourself like you already have cancer. Take care of your health that way and get lots of sleep and try to minimize stress. Filter your water. Don't drink tap water. And also, like, be careful of where you're buying your produce from. Anything that you can buy in South America or Southern Hemisphere is better than California right now. And I've actually picked up some hot particles on lettuce from California in one of my local grocery stores with my Geiger counter. Looking into, like, supplements, and there's a couple of really good detox sites out there. Master of Many Things has a really good detox site. And there's certain foods that have shown to have protective qualities for people. It's really important to eat a lot of foods that are high in potassium, like bananas and dates and nuts, and fish would usually be part of that too. But, fish is kind of off limits right now until we get a better handle on the level of contamination, unless you can get stuff that was packaged pre-Fukushima. We had kind of a going away party for fish at my house a few months ago because we used to eat salmon and sushi like all the time and scallops.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it depressing? It's so depressing. I mean, really.
Yeah.
Those types of creature comforts, I mean, unbelievable.
People that lived around Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when we bombed them, that ate miso soup that has, like, seaweed in it,
yes.
A lot of them didn't get any health effects from the radiation that they were exposed to. So seaweed could be very protective. You just have to be careful where you're buying it from.
And that the iodine content?
Yeah, and it helps to block the radioactive iodine from uptake in your thyroid. And I don't know what other protective qualities that it might have, but I make sure that I have it all the time, and I, like, kind of mix it into recipes. Cooking from scratch and using a lot of spices, different spices like cayenne pepper and basil and rosemary are also anything that's, like, anti-cancer. And you can search out the top 10 anti-cancer foods and the top 10 foods highest in potassium and start working as much of that stuff into your diet as possible. It's harder, though, for people who are working to cook from scratch. And we used to eat out a lot, and, like, fast food is terrible for you. Anything that's processed, you're not getting any nutrition, and you need to have the nutrition so your immune system can fight off any cancer. It's not so much whether you get exposure to radiation as whether your body can, like, heal itself. and that's what your immune system does. So it's really important to protect your immune system. And what I've noticed in my own family and from getting emails from other people is, like, it's not that I'm getting sick more or people that I know are getting sick more, but when we do get sick, it takes forever to get rid of it. You know, like bronchitis. I had bronchitis for months this winter. And, you know, things like that, you just need to, once you get on a really good diet where you're watching your health and you have an idea of how you should be feeling, you might be able to back off on the mitigation a little bit as long as you're not having any symptoms. And you can maybe, you know, have a steak dinner and maybe eat some fish and see how you feel. I mean, because we got to eat something. And, you know, it sucks to have to cut all of that stuff out. But the more people can eat lower on the food chain, eating plants instead of meat is better because the concentrations go higher. And we have cesium right now that's being detected in our milk supply. And we have had for months. You know, cow's milk and cheese and beef products, you really should try to limit your intake on those. And I still buy a gallon of cow's milk a week because my kids like it with their cereal. And
Right.
we used to drink a gallon of it a day. Now we only go through a gallon a week. So we've just cut down here and there. And then if one of us are sick or one of my kids starts getting nosebleeds, which happened a lot during last summer, we just hit the mitigation harder and make sure we take supplements and things like that. And getting enough sleep is really important.
Wow, you're a good mom. If other moms should pay attention. And I like the advice. That's pretty good, Joe. You know, treat yourself like you've already got cancer. I mean, because how can you go wrong there?
You can't,
Right.
man. And, you know, I think another good supplement to take, and of course this is something that everybody should, is vitamin C. Vitamin C has a tremendous anti-cancer potential, as well as
Yeah, it
colloidal
does.
silver. And for all you people in medicinal states, hey, you know, Mary Jane, it's anti-cancer. You know,
I've heard
hemp
that.
oil.
And
Yeah,
then,
hemp
you know,
oil.
that's something that working in clinical research for years and years, that's something the whole medical community knows about. But
Sure.
before I hurt my back, the only thing that I knew that cannabis did was it lowered intraocular pressure in patients with glaucoma. And for 25 years, we had patients that would come in, you know, old people coming in saying, hey, doc, you know, can I smoke pot? Is it good for my eyes to smoke pot? And that was before it was legal for medicinal use in Michigan. And the doctors used to tell them all the time, go ahead, it's got other benefits to your health as well. Cannabis has been proven, clinically proven, through the extensive research that's been done in Europe. There's over 20,000 studies that have been done in Europe on how cannabis affects health. There's 126 medical conditions that it's been shown to help work as effectively, if not better, than pharmaceuticals, because pharmaceuticals have so many side effects.
Awful.
And it's part
Like
of
that.
the reason that it's illegal. And it's yet another reason to vote for Ron Paul, because he is a physician. He understands the connection between the pharmaceutical industry and why cannabis is illegal. And that's one of the first things that he said he's going to do, is to make it legal for everyone. And right now, this threat that we have from Fukushima is so severe that every man, woman, and child needs to be able to work cannabis into their diet. And it's been proven scientifically also that it's beneficial to children. And they did extensive research on pregnant women in Jamaica. And there was a group of women that smoked pot throughout their whole pregnancy and a group of women who didn't. And the babies that were born to the pot-smoking mothers actually excelled in every category of testing. Reflexes were one. Speech as the child got older. They developed faster than the babies of the non-pot smoking mothers. Like, you have all these little receptors in your body, not just in your brain, but in your GI tract and in your kidneys and in your liver, that uptake the endocannabinoids in cannabis. It's, you know, nature's medicine.
Unbelievable. And, you know, you'd never know it by the way they demonize it. Half an hour to go, folks. So much left to talk about. She brought up Ron Paul tonight, Wednesday, from 10 to 12. Fantastic show. Popeye always gives very, very good information. And also, I got to give a shout out real quick to my brother Greg in Vegas, who, even though he's on vacation, his last vacation for a very, 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 very long time, as he's going to be a daddy here soon. He still taking the time to listen in, and boy, he's got nothing but good things to say about you, Christina. And folks, you can check out her website, FukushimaFacts.com. And before the break, you brought up Ron Paul. And Ron Paul's strategy here seems to be working here. Of course, folks, if you don't know, you see he's getting absolutely no media attention whatsoever. And now his strategy of focusing on delegates, they're starting to catch wind of it. The Republican National Convention, oh boy, looking like it's going to be a real thriller. But I want to play this clip from Fox News real quick, because today they've acknowledged that Ron Paul is bigger, much bigger than people know. Listen to this.
I'm Doug Schoen. We're back with Campaign Insiders, Pat Goodell, John LeBoutelier. Let's go to Soundbite 7, Ron Paul at the Nevada Convention, and talk about Nevada and Maine. What happened, I guess, when Ron Paul won, 21 of 25 delegates in Nevada? And Maine, John, what was the...
23. That's a lot in Maine, too.
Yeah. Did he take control of Maine?
I think he did.
Yeah. So my question is, what are the implications, guys, for the continued presence of Ron Paul as a force? We're getting tweets about him. We got them yesterday when we were doing Campaign Insiders on the news channel. What are the implications?
Well, there are a couple. First of all, let's understand something. His organization is very good in these small, arcane-ruled, dominated events. And what they're doing is they're stealing delegates from Romney in terms of the people. Most of these states still bind these delegates to vote as the results were. But he is electing, this is happening all over the country. Apparently half of Massachusetts, I just read this morning, also he elected the delegates rather than the Romney delegates. In Romney's own state.
One of his
This is what his
Can he deny Romney the nomination?
No, of course not. Nor can he tie it up. The fact is, though, it does go to the point that John has made before. Romney has to deal with Paul. Paul has a particular constituency that neither candidate really has gotten. I'll let you speak to that, John. But the third thing is, it just tells you that the Romney campaign is about this deep against a campaign against Obama it is a mile deep. Do
you remember several months ago?
They can't organize their conventions to get their delegates elected?
Yeah. Do you remember we used to cover at night here on FoxNews.com the debates, and it was speculated, written about during the debates, that the only one of the other candidates that Ron Paul never went after in the debates was Mitt Romney. Remember that? It was written about, and how, they have some sort of secret deal or something. Now here we are. The last two remaining candidates are Romney and Ron Paul. No attempt that we know of publicly by Romney to reach out to Ron Paul. It's almost a dismissive thing. I ask you guys this. November. Which has more force to it? Ralph Nader in 2000, who won Florida for George W. Bush, right? Who has more? Ralph Nader in 2000, Ron Paul in 2012.
Time will tell.
Yeah, but it could be. It could be one state.
The point Pat was making before about Europe that I would want to underscore. We are in uncharted times. The fact that we have swing states that are effectively tied, a national election that's effectively tied, to me is less important than what we've all been saying, particularly Mr. Goodell, which is that the electorate is polarized, divided, and angry, with the emphasis on anger. And do I believe that a Ron Paul could shake things up disproportionately? I could. Less because of who he is than what he represents.
Then an option for people, and this is why I keep saying, because his vote, we saw it all through the primaries. We talked about on election nights, primary nights. His vote, he has a lot of Democrats and independents, by the way, who are against our involvement overseas, which upsets a lot of the Republican base, but it appeals to voters. He's very libertarian. He appeals to a lot of regular conservatives on the Fed and on the budget and so forth. It is an interesting coalition approach. These are voters that neither other of the parties know how to speak to. And Romney needs to find a way to accommodate Paul and his own party. Otherwise, he's going to end up with a convention floor full of Paul delegates, whether they can vote for him or not, or will vote, they may bolt. They may cause a ruckus. They better address this. I was totally off my radar scope till yesterday when we got the first tweets. I give our viewers.
Do you agree with that?
I think it's
credit.
much bigger than people know, and it's the only remaining alternative to Romney for people to go towards if they want to.
And
If they're getting
look, we
buyer's
have an
remorse.
economy that's failing right now. I mean, it's back to what we saw the last 2 years. The job report was terrible. The only reason the unemployment was down, the 115,000 jobs added was terribly small in expectation. Less than half of what it was in January and February, and that wasn't great. And we had 363,000 people leave the workforce. Now, I'm telling you, this is, and that's the reason. If the unemployment rate, if the participation in work were the same level as it was of the population when Obama took office, the unemployment rate would be 11%. The American economy is in trouble. We saw what it's doing in Europe. It's going to have an impact. And Ron Paul, this protest, this desire to say something, when neither party, we have a president out saying, a vice president yesterday who said, oh, you know what, this recovery is just like on the same track of every other recovery, which is disingenuous to be kind. And then we have Romney out saying, just vote for me if you don't like what's going on with no program.
We don't.
Unbelievable, folks, And Ron Paul really is the only guy that can change these things, not just for the economy or for our rights or for the well-being of this country, but also for your health. Because it's like you said before, I played that clip, Christina, Ron Paul's really for, the legalization of cannabis. You said he was a doctor. There's a lot of knowledge there. He could really do a lot of things to help this along.
Right, and he doesn't play all the games, in politics and the money, the way all of our other politicians have got, caught up in it. And what, the more people that we have waking up to what's going on in this country, the bigger his numbers are going to get. And something that really stopped me in my tracks last weekend is when I saw a video of him giving a speech in Texas.
Yes.
He talked about false flags. And we actually did a show on this because of the NATO summit that's coming up and some of the possible nuclear hazmat situation that they've been training for.
Yes.
And a day or two before this, when he was giving the speech in Texas, he brought up false flags, and he mentioned a ship going down. And someone caught him after he was leaving the stage and said, what have you heard about the possible false flag in Chicago? And he said, I haven't heard anything about that, but I'm concerned anytime I hear false flag. And I mean, that was astounding for him to come out with that.
Right, and I want to point this out too, because you just brought up NATO, and this exercise going on with the nuclear stuff. Do you know that? And this just came out today. A 500 kiloton German hydrogen bomb goes missing.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if something like that happens in Chicago? I mean, folks, I don't need to go any farther, but you could see what they're prepping for. And what the drill's for. If this was so important, Christina, let me get your thoughts on this. Is it so important to have it in Chicago? Why can't you have the stupid summit in Camp David? Why?
Well, they are moving to Camp David after the first couple of days because I think they want to talk about Agenda 21. They're actually only going to be in Chicago for, I think, Saturday, and then they're moving to Camp David for the rest of the meeting because they wanted privacy.
Right, but I mean, what?
Chicago just long enough to screw up the traffic.
Right,
Yeah.
But I wonder what the significance is. I mean, this is our third largest city. Why would you go and tie up the third largest economy, really, if you think about it, as far as cities go? Why would you tie that up? I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. And I just can't.
Probably only one of the only cities that can handle a convention of that size. From the standpoint of like hotels and meeting space and like all the media that's going to be there. I used to attend these academy meetings from like the Academy of Ophthalmology and so forth. And like New Orleans used to be a big city for that kind of stuff. Chicago, Anaheim. They probably don't want to go to California because they know how bad the radiation is over there.
Yeah, wouldn't want to get radiated. Let me just go to Chicago.
Yeah.
Unbelievable, folks. Last segment of the broadcast coming up. But boy, so much left to talk.
Folks, don't forget to check out Against the Wall with James Freeland, otherwise known as JJ, Tuesday and Thursday mornings from 8 to 10 Eastern. He also does a show Sunday from 3 to 5 right here on Orion Talk Radio. It's a frequent program tonight with Joe Joseph and Tim Watts and Christina. The RadChick is on from FukushimaFacts.com. She's also got her own show right here on the Orion Talk Radio Network. You can hear it Monday through Friday at noon to 1 p.m. Eastern. And Christina, I want to throw out one last thought that I just want people to get it through their heads. The criminality of negligence by our government. Because, folks, you've heard everything that Christina's had to say, and believe me, we haven't got into everything that she knows. We'd probably have to have a 6-hour show, Christina, to talk about everything that you know on this. But the fact that all the things that you know, all the things that you've imparted to everybody on the radio, why are we not getting this from our government, folks? Stop and just ask yourself that question. Because there should be PSAs, public service announcements that are talking about how to take care of yourself, how to, about maybe the dairy issue, the meat issue, the fish issue, or water, anything like that. But are you hearing anything from the federal government, folks? Nothing. The fact that we have to hear it from RadChick, from Christina, is she the brightest person in the world? And I'm not taking a swipe at Christina here, but she's got it figured out. And you think our government can't? So that's just something to take into mind. Christina, I want to ask you something about mitigating the effects of radiation, something I heard you talk about before, which I'd never heard before, but the government actually using baking soda to actually kind of clean up sites?
Yeah, it's what the military uses because it's cheap and effective. Baking soda and activated carbon and things like kitty litter that contains bentonite clay. Those things all bind to radioactive particles and neutralize them. And, what I've been playing with this idea of, instead of spraying chemtrails, maybe they should be spraying baking soda over everything to help neutralize all the stuff laying around on the ground. It's causing all these mutations in plants and dandelions that we've been seeing. And, but the government's, their lack of response to this issue is just, it's absolutely disgusting and unacceptable, and eventually there will be some kind of legal action against them, I think. And there's already some people that have been working on that with the ACLU. But my biggest concern is getting the information out there of how people protect themselves and their children on a day-to-day basis, and what to do in a shelter-in scenario in case that happens, because we'd only have a few days to prepare, and I want people to just think about it. It's a good idea to be prepared anyway. Something I kind of grew up with because my mom grew up in Berlin during the war, and she lived on peanut butter for a couple months. They didn't have any food then either, and we always had a huge pantry when I was growing up, and that kind of tied us over for a while too. When I went through this back thing, we had a supply of food and stuff that tied us over for a while. But we've gotten kind of away from that. That was more of a wartime mentality. But we're kind of in this war now, and with all this uncertainty going on and some of the legislation that's being passed, it's very concerning that the government's getting ready for something. And what's always concerned me is I don't understand, with everything that I know about Fukushima, how they think they can get away with this in the long term. And I don't mean 10 years. I mean the next year or two, unless they know something else is coming. And the biggest thing or threat that I see is the economic collapse, and what the fallout might be from that, or a sun event, where we get hit with a huge sun flare that takes out our power grid. And so, it's a good idea to be prepared for a number of different reasons. And if you look into Fukushima and you start waking up at all the stuff going on with this, you'll wake up to other things too. The more you look into stuff and you see how these connections are between the government, the nuke industry, the concerted silence, whose best interests are being protected here. It's all about making money. That's all they're protecting. They don't want people to stop eating fast food and taking care of their health and smoking pot all the time because you'd never go to the doctor. You'd feel too good. And if people know that this radiation thing could affect their longevity, if we're looking, I thought I had another 40 years. If I've only got another 5 or 10 years, well, I'm going to have a lot more fun in that 5 or 10 years, and I'm going to do some more things to, make sure that my family has a good time too. And, that doesn't include working and paying taxes. That includes doing things for ourselves and having a better quality of life. And it's almost like they're against us knowing that because of that reason. They want everybody to just kill themselves working, and they keep making us sick. So we boost the economy in terms of health care. I mean, look around you. Look at all the billboards right now for cancer centers that are going up. They know what's coming.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good point, because that's going to go through the roof in the next few years. Absolutely. And again, your advice about treat yourself like you've got cancer, I think that's probably the best advice people could take. And it's a very harsh thing to think about, because nobody wants to think they're in that much danger. But you are, folks. For crying out loud, you are. I mean, half of this audience probably knows, but there's so many other people out there that don't know yet, and that's what frustrates me about this, is so many people say, well, there's a big deal, it'd be on the news. I'm like, you are a moron, aren't you? And so it's really tough. People don't get the fact that this is the hardest situation the world has faced in a long time.
Yeah, and sometimes all you can do is just plant the seed. If people don't get it, I move on, try to spread the word in different ways, either by writing or going on different shows, reaching different groups of people. And if every one of those people that were in chat tonight, talks to 2 or 3 people, and they talk to 2 or 3 people, the next time they hear news about Fukushima, they might pay more attention to it, and eventually they'll know. There's no way around this. Eventually they're going to know. And
Absolutely.
I wish they had paid attention, but you can't waste your time beating people over the head with this. If they don't get it, they don't get it. They will eventually.
It's not just maybe people in general, but it seems like right from the start of this whole thing, the reaction from government officials and from TEPCO was just so far behind what happened at Chernobyl. You'd think, did we learn anything from that event? And now, when we're talking about, this other reactor, this cooling pool that we're worried about right now, I think, well, what can we do to shore that up right now? Is anybody making any attempt? Is anything being done?
They put jacks underneath it to hold up the bottom of the pool, and they put scaffolding around it. And they actually put out a video last weekend showing one side of the pool, and it looks just like concert staging that they put up around it. But, there's, tons and tons of water and fuel, and I don't even know what the weight of that pool is. Plus, there was a 35-ton crane that fell into it, too, that they just found.
Oops.
So that's got all that weight in it.
Mundane details.
Yeah.
Mundane details like a 35-ton crane.
There's been no talk of trying to entomb it or anything.
No, and they should have been doing that right at the beginning, building a wall around it.
You know what somebody had the nerve to tell me as an argument to this, and the fact that, if it's such a danger, they said, well, why don't they just nuke the whole site? It's already full of poison, so why don't you just nuke it and evaporate it? And I am thinking, what? Nuke it? What do you think about that?
No, our government was prepared to do that back in July, but Japan wouldn't evacuate Tokyo, and Tokyo would have to be evacuated first if they did that. And the logic behind that, as crazy as it sounds, would be that the whole place would go up at once. The plume would travel around the world and settle out of the atmosphere in about 2.5 months to 3.5 months' time. Uh-huh. And then everybody could come out of their houses and start the decontamination process. At least we'd have some control over the end of this. Now what we're looking at is these long-term releases, tons and tons of water going into the ocean every day, radioactive steam coming out of the ground, blowing into the air, and then a lot of the storms that hit North America are generated out of this huge radiation slick that's forming between Japan and Hawaii. That's where all our storms come out of. So that stuff just goes up into the air and it rains out over here.
Wow. Well, we're about out of time. Anything you want to plug before we end the show tonight?
Yeah, if you go to Fukushima Facts, there's links to, I have a Twitter where I put up my forecasts and news. I have the link to the radio show, and I have links to, I have like 14 Facebook pages. The main one is RadChick, but then we've started one for every nuclear reactor in the United States. And every time we have one with a significant problem, we start another page so that people who live around these plants and are worried about the effects just from day-to-day operations can go to that specific page, and they don't have to sort through all the nuke stuff, that comes through RadChick feed. And Jules from Orion set that up, so we have feeds going into all different places, so you can kind of tailor the news that you want. If you live around San Onofre and you just want to know what's going on with that plant, you can like the page, and then it'll show up in your feed. And so if you go there, there's links to everything, and then we have this really cool page where we have all of the earthquake and sky tools, and you can see volcano cameras on there, and all the radiation monitors that are available to us are on that page as well. So you can look at the EPA graphs, even though half of them don't work. You can look at URDEP. You can look at Japan and see what's going on over there. And
awesome. Well, we're about
just start paying attention more to the weather and the rain, and try to avoid exposure wherever you can, because we're looking at a really long-term situation with this.
Unbelievable. Well, thank you for coming on the broadcast tonight, Christine. It was awesome having you.